to episode 30 of Gar Borras' Time Machine. This is episode 30, part 2. Today we're going to be talking once again about the history of The Tonight Show. Today, Gar, specifically we're going to be talking about basically the Johnny Carson and Jay Leno eras of the show. Last time we talked about Steve Allen and the Jack Parr eras of the show, and it's been one of our most popular shows, so we thank people for tuning in. Now, let me ask you, Gar, you know, when Johnny Carson took over the Tonight Show, what was that like for you? Because you're one of the few people I know that's actually kind of been watching the Tonight Show for the whole 68 years that it's been on TV.
Well, it was, it was like I'm trying to figure out the right word for it.
Yeah.
You know, it was the heyday for the show.
Really, it was. Yeah.
You know, it was. I'm trying to.
The pinnacle.
Figure out the words.
The pinnacle.
It was the Camelot.
There you go, Camelot. Yeah.
The Tonight Show. It really was because, it's when everything gelled.
And that's a great word, Camelot, because when I think back to some of his. I mean, most of the time Johnny would come out in a suit, but every so often he'd do these little routines and he put like a crown, he looked like a king, and so it was Camelot-like in some aspect.
Well, when he used to dress up like the genie, was one of my favorite parts. I mean, that part of the show was hilarious. You know, he would dress up like a genie, and he would hold an envelope up to his head and act like he was thinking, and then he would call out the answer.
Yeah.
And then he would open up the envelope, and then he would read the question.
Oh, yeah.
And basically doing a joke backwards.
Yeah.
And it was hilarious.
Oh, sure it was.
Absolutely hilarious.
You know, I've been prepping for today's show, posting a lot of stuff on our Facebook page, and I made a comment on there that, the Tonight Show is something different to almost virtually anybody you talk to, depending on when you were alive. Like for my lifetime, I'm talking about my two probably favorite hosts would have to be starting with Johnny Carson and then Jay Leno. And that is kind of, when I think of a Tonight Show, because of my age and when I was born and all that, that was my Tonight Show. Other people very much like yourself, first time you saw the Tonight Show was, of course, with Steve Allen. I think, what a lucky dog that Gar was, being alive back then to see that, and then,
yes.
So you've been there since kind of day one, and what a unique perspective that gives you,
Well, it's, I feel really, really lucky, because, when we start getting to be, my age, I'm basically on the last third of my life. And you start really kind of reflecting on your life and start realizing things that you never realized when you were younger, is that, I think we're all really kind of lucky to have been born when we were.
Yeah, sure.
Because of the incredible things that, we got to experience in our lifetime that previous generations didn't get to experience, and then following generations after won't get to experience either. So, Johnny Carson and the Tonight Show, for me, for my generation, because I'm an older generation than you, that was the same effect for me as Jay Leno had for you.
Oh, sure.
But it's just, the show kind of reached a point. It was so successful.
Yeah.
there were no holds barred.
Yeah.
You know, by today's standards, people wouldn't, think it would be a big deal, but they were doing things in their show that were kind of edgy and controversial for the time.
Sure.
It was much more conservative times, and they were, I remember one show where I don't know how, the guest, appeared on a show with no shirt on.
Yeah.
And the next thing I know, everybody on the show took their shirt off, including Johnny Carson.
Yeah,
and so he's doing the show, and they're all just cracking jokes about not having a shirt on, and just everybody's ad-libbing, and it was just like a show that was completely out of control, but it was hilarious.
And it was hilarious because it was something that people did not expect, which is what great comedic geniuses can do, like Johnny Carson, and what would make an episode like that so great, especially going back, we're talking about the 70s and 80s, whenever you may have seen that, and there's a shock factor of that, because back in the 70s, 80s, I mean, as tame as just some man taking off his shirt on TV may seem now, it was a wild thing to do back then, and I could just imagine watching the episode, and you'd hear, ah.
Well, I was watching it,
yeah.
And it really did have a shock factor, but then also, it had the shock factor, but it also had the element because everybody that was on the show was absolutely having the best time, and laughing, and just realizing how there was control of the show was lost.
Yeah, in fact, a guy like Johnny Carson, okay, what made him such a great comedian, besides having the ability to make people laugh, was getting away with something like that, and then the other guest in the show just kind of joining in on the joke without even being told. And it's more of a natural joke than if they had planned it or wrote it out, if it had been scripted.
Yes.
And that's why it works. And as we like to do on the show, Gar, I was kind of thinking back today in prepping for a show today, as we like to do, kind of think back to what was going on at the time in the world historically. And I came across a couple interesting things. Okay, now, going back to 1954, when The Tonight Show premiered, Dwight D. Eisenhower is who was president. And a couple other interesting facts that were taking place in the world in 1954. The Supreme Court ruled on Brown versus the Board of Education. The Supreme Court decided that, in the case, that segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. And here's the biggie, Gar, for what we're talking about. Swanson frozen food, they introduced the TV dinner in 1954. Can you believe that?
Well, no, I was around, and it was a big deal because that was when TV trays were introduced also.
Yeah.
Previous to that, a TV tray didn't exist.
In fact,
you all sat down at the dinner table and you ate dinner.
Yeah.
But when TV dinners were introduced, you had to sit in your chair that you watched TV, not at the dinner table.
And you want to get it all over the place.
And you put up that TV tray and you ate your dinner while you were sitting in your comfortable chair, that you normally watched TV. So not only TV dinners were introduced, but that was why a TV tray was also invented.
In fact, I was reading today. I know we're getting a little off tangent here, but we want people to kind of understand what was going on in the world and what a big deal that was. I mean, TV dinners really didn't exist prior to that. And I mean, I don't know who thought of the idea, but they said they called them TV dinners because they were big enough to fit on a TV tray. The little tray that the food comes in looked like a TV at the time. And so, and again, like you said before, prior to that, people would never think of dare eating dinner in front of a TV. You'd eat together as a family at the kitchen table.
It was groundbreaking because that just did not exist at that time. And I grew up as a child where, every day you sat down at dinner and you ate dinner at the dinner table. And then all of a sudden it changed.
And now, getting back to the Tonight Show, I don't know if you're aware of this, but prior to replacing Jack Parr as the host of The Tonight Show, Johnny Carson was the host of the weekly afternoon quiz show, Who Do You Trust, on ABC, which at the time was the lowest rated radio television network at the time. We're talking about ABC. And Who Do You Trust was originally titled, Do You Trust Your Wife? And that title outraged many people. Like, what? Why wouldn't you trust your wife? So they changed the title just to Who Do You Trust? And oddly enough, that's where Johnny Carson and Ed McMahon first met, because Ed McMahon was also kind of his sidekick on the show and would follow him over to the Tonight Show.
Well, with that show, he started to find his comfort zone,
niche, if you will,
which was, ad-lib, quick quips.
Yeah, quick wit, yeah.
So he would read what was on the card, but then he would add his little, 2 cents, which was very witty and funny. And, that aspect of him interjecting those, ad-lib lines, instead of just only reading from the card, catapulted that show into huge success. And that's the reason why he started getting invited as, guest on The Tonight Show when Jack Parr was doing the show, and then also being invited to be guest host.
Oh, sure. And
but, it wasn't just that he did that show. He actually catapulted that show into very, very high ratings, which got everybody's attention. What's the deal about this guy named Johnny Carson?
Yeah, and it's interesting because it said Johnny Carson could not take over the hosting duties for The Tonight Show until October 1st, 1962, because ABC refused to let Carson out of his contract until the very date it expired. So after Jack Parr left The Tonight Show for several months until Johnny Carson was able to, take over, they had several guest hosts. That's what they did.
Yeah, but that was also, some, powerful executive that worked for the network that decided that, to do it just out of spite. Because in reality, they could have allowed him to do it sooner, but they waited until the last second
when it expired
to allow him to be able to do the Tonight Show.
And now, Gar, like we said, we're going in episode 3 of this that we're going to do in 2 weeks. Which was your great idea. We're going to focus on some of the people that got their career started on the Tonight Show. And some of those guest hosts that they had during the downtime before Carson could take over, they had people such as Art Linkletter, Joey Bishop, Merv Griffin, Jerry Lewis, Groucho Marx. I mean, I don't know if you've seen any of those.
At that time, all of those names were top bill names.
Oh, sure. Yeah, even today those names mean something. Many of them are long gone, but I mean, they would go on to have legendary careers, which is kind of just the point you made by realizing we have to do an episode 3 of this just to talk about people such as that got their start on the Tonight Show.
Absolutely. Most people don't even think about that, but what is the constant on the show besides the host and the sidekick?
Comedy. I mean, the guest too. Yeah, I mean that was, and another thing that we need to really make a point of. Back in my younger days when I was watching the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson or even Jay Leno, you tune in because I remember, I mean, movies would be coming out. Like you'd have different movies being released every week. Okay, Tom Cruise is going to be here to talk about his latest movie, Top Gun, and you would tune in, that Friday night just to see Tom Cruise talking about his new movie. Or, Van Halen might be coming out to perform a song from their latest album, and you would tune in for that.
Well, heck yeah.
Yeah.
I took the bait just like everybody else, with those.
And see, so when you have a show like this, comedy is a big part of it, but if it was just, Johnny Carson telling jokes, I mean, it's basically a stand-up act, and that's what made the show work, because it was a combination of a host telling his jokes and then interacting with the guest.
But he had just phenomenal writers.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't. He might have some input with the jokes, but he has a whole joke writing team.
Oh, sure.
That comes up with all of this stuff, and he just turns it into a deliverable product. That seems seamless and everything like that. But without those extremely highly talented joke writers, his monologues wouldn't have been what they were. And one of the times, the time that was an epiphany moment for me.
Yeah.
About the importance of the writers and how that's the foundation that holds everything else up.
Yeah.
Because back in the 90s, the writers went on strike.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And that was all the TV show writers. That meant all of the writers for late night, the writers for virtually everything, that was constantly going, which was mostly TV stuff.
Yeah.
And they went on strike, and rightfully so, because when all was said and done, they proved their point.
Oh, sure.
And what their point was when they went on strike, now you no longer had writers writing for the Tonight Show. Now you no longer had writers. And I was watching late night TV during that time, and then all of a sudden I'm watching the monologue, and it's not funny.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sitting there going, yeah, but this guy's always funny.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I watch it the next day, and the next day, and the next day, and then I realized, holy crap, the writers had everything to do with that opening monologue being funny.
Yeah.
And then when the writers went off strike and they went back to work, guess what?
Yeah.
Those monologues went back to being funny again.
Yeah, it's very much like, listening to one of your favorite bands, and you think, oh, well, that guy sung the song. He must have wrote all the hits. But if you take a little time and you look at the songwriting credit on the album, you might realize, no, he's the guy that sings the songs in the band, but they had somebody else write that song, that was a hit, and kind of just the voice, if you will. And another guy that I was interested to learn, but kind of got his start on the Tonight Show. Here's another name for you. I don't know if this means anything to you off the bat. Hugh Downs. Now, Hugh Downs, you may know that name from 2020. He apparently
he went on to news fame.
2020.
But early in his career, he was an announcer
on the Tonight Show, and then he would go on until his death, I guess, to host 2020. So again, another one of those big names, and you make a couple great points there, because but writing is really a big part. I remember that strike, and we didn't get any new episodes of our favorite TV show until they came to an agreement, and so that's another interesting fact there. And on October 1st, 1962, it was Groucho Marx who introduced Johnny Carson on the new Tonight Show. So just imagine, as Johnny's taken over Tonight Show, the one who kind of very first person to introduce him is Groucho Marx. Can you imagine?
I bet you, Johnny's at that time is saying, to himself, pinch me.
Yeah.
Am I dreaming? You know what I mean? Am I going to wake up any second? Is this, you know what I mean? Because, yeah, I mean, when you think about it, you got somebody of the iconic nature of Groucho Marx.
Yeah, to introduce you.
You know what I mean? Who does not respect that guy's body of work?
Yeah.
I mean, it's intimidating, his body of work. And he's the guy that's announcing the new host, Johnny Carson. That's crazy. And I mean, that's a lifelong memory.
Yeah, and then on the very first episode, also that Johnny did, his famous sidekick also was on that episode, where he would remain with him by his side until the final episode they did together, like 30 years later. But on that very first episode, where Ed McMahon came up with this trademark line, "Here's Johnny."
You know, there came a point that I had watched the show so much that you wind up taking that for granted.
Yeah, it just became a thing.
Here's Johnny.
Yeah.
You know, and then all of a sudden, you know, you realize that just something like that,
the impact,
just a small piece of that show, just a very small piece of that show winds up taking a life of its own, because after, you know, that, now it becomes used in The Shining for a hugely, powerful moment in that movie, and it's just like, you know, when a line from, you know, starts getting used elsewhere in other contexts, you know, that's gold right there.
Oh, sure.
That whoever came up with that came up with gold.
Like the episode we did, Gar, quite a while back, on our favorite movie lines. I mean, there are those lines in some of our favorite movies where it wasn't even intentional, just a line in the movie, but for whatever reason, the audience, when they see the film for the very first time, that particular line just kind of caught them, and it meant something. And not just to one person, but so many people. It's like, wow, those lines are magical.
Well, you know, it's just kind of like Price is Right. Come on down.
Yeah, again.
You know what I mean? It's like, you know, it's like simple words, and you don't even, you know, its purpose in the show is very incidental. It's not a big part of the show, but it's got a life of its own, because, I mean, everybody remembers. Come on down. You know, here's Johnny.
And Gar, let me ask you, how important is it to you when watching a show like The Tonight Show where it's filmed? Because what I was reading, which is kind of interesting, for the first 10 years that Johnny hosted the show, from 1962 to 1972, they continued to film it in New York. But in 1972, Johnny wanted to moved to Los Angeles. They moved to NBC Studios, which was, interesting enough, in Burbank, but they wanted people to think it was filmed in Hollywood, so they said it was filmed at NBC Studios where it was, but they did not say live from Burbank, they would tell people live from Hollywood, California. Again, just a little kind of silly thing, but wanting people to think, you know, because that's Hollywood, we're filming in Hollywood. What do you think of stuff like that?
You know, it's
kind of
everybody has to come up with what they think that the public is going to buy.
Yeah.
And some, you know, and you know, a lot of times these things are thought up at, you know, when you're sitting at that, you know, corporate desk.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Where you're bouncing ideas off of each other and stuff like that. And sometimes, you know, people will come up with these ideas, and they will go over, and it'll wind up being gold. Like, here's Johnny. You know, but that doesn't mean that every single time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, and there's gonna be some that are gonna be bombs.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then you know, when you're the guy that came up with that one that turns out to be a bomb, then you slink back to your little corner. You know what I mean? But you know, that's part of the creative process. There's always going to be something that's going to wind up on the cutting room floor. Yeah,
and you know what? What's interesting, to kind of make the point that we've been making throughout today's episode of just how popular Johnny Carson was at the time. If you remember in part one of our episode talking about The Tonight Show, When it came time for Steve Allen to leave The Tonight Show, part of the reason for that is they gave him a Sunday night show and they wanted him to focus on that. But at the time, the Ed Sullivan Show was on the air also, and that was becoming even more popular and kind of getting much better ratings than The Tonight Show. Well, again, to kind of, at the time, we're talking when Johnny Carson takes over The Tonight Show in 1962. The Ed Sullivan Show is still on, but it's very much in a different place in that because of the popularity of Johnny Carson, the Ed Sullivan Show ratings start to fall, and eventually that is taken off the air because The Tonight Show was just so popular with Johnny Carson.
Now, when you're having that kind of effect on a show like the Ed Sullivan Show, which most people at that time felt like that show was untouchable,
yeah,
uncompetable. You know what I mean? It really, when the Ed Sullivan Show was on Sunday nights, I don't think anybody thought that there would be anything that would ever be able to compete with that show.
Yeah.
And it went on for gosh knows how many years after year after year after year being top dog like that, and just nobody could compete with the show. And then you're talking about Johnny Carson being a show that having that kind of an effect on a show like the Ed Sullivan Show is more than noteworthy.
Oh, sure. Sure it is. And the other thing, Gar, is like Jack Parr before him, Johnny Carson continued the Tonight Show tradition of launching the careers of several comedians. Joan Rivers, Joey Bishop, I think we mentioned, David Letterman, Jay Leno, just to name a few.
And back in those days, these were people that nobody knew who they were.
Yeah. And
you're talking about them now, and we think of them as icons.
Yeah, they are, but back then it was a very different thing. And,
yes.
And to kind of further that, I was reading that Carson launched the careers of comedians such as Jerry Seinfeld, Joan Rivers, I mentioned, Jeff Foxworthy, Ellen DeGeneres, Freddie Prinze, David Brenner, Tim Allen, Drew Carey, now Roseanne Barr. Now look at that list of names I just mentioned. I mean, all would go on to have Jerry Seinfeld had a #1 hit comedy show. Jeff Foxworthy, Ellen DeGeneres would go on to have her own hit talk show for several years. Tim Allen, of course, would go on to find fame in movies and with Home Improvement. And Drew Carey, we did an episode on Price is Right. He's the current host of that. So who knows if it was not for Johnny Carson launching these people's career on the Tonight Show, who knows what if they would have ever had any type of success in comedy,
Yes, yeah, absolutely. He was, kind of the same thing as the Ed Sullivan Show too, because the Ed Sullivan Show was known for launching, a literal parade of, performers that just turned out to become iconic. I mean, it's very intimidating to look at the list of people's career that were launched from the Ed Sullivan Show. I mean, it's literally intimidating.
Which is why, Gar...
but then the same thing for Johnny Carson. It's very intimidating. But it's a later generation, in following of the tradition of the Ed Sullivan Show.
Which is why Gar...
It really was. It just followed that tradition and carried it on for the next generation, which turned out to be my generation.
Yeah, which is why I don't think you're going to be surprised when I tell you, Gar, that, the more of these episodes we do, the Ed Sullivan Show keeps coming up in the research, which is why eventually we're going to have to do an episode on that. But, the Tonight Show, I think...
Oh, absolutely.
The Tonight Show, the fact that it's been on the air for 68 years, one of the longest running TV shows, I think, just to talk about the fact that, Steve Allen, Jack Parr, Johnny Carson have all passed on, and the Tonight Show, I mean, they've all got their eras, they've all got their legacies, but the Tonight Show has outlived these guys, and they've gone on to legendary careers. The Tonight Show, if you know what I'm trying. My point is, the Tonight Show has kind of got a legacy of its own. It's bigger than any one host, you know.
Yes, it's the star now. Where in the past it was Johnny Carson that was the star.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, you are correct. The star now is the actual show. And
what's interesting in that is, in looking for stuff to post about Jack Parr on our Facebook page, just yesterday, I came across the fact, I did not know this, that I'm aware of who Dick Cavett is, but there's an episode online of a Dick Cavett show with Jack Parr, and I did not know that there was a connection between them, which was the fact before Dick Cavett found any kind of fame, he was a writer and a talent scout on The Tonight Show for Jack Parr. He worked with Jack, and they were kind of talking about that in this episode of the Dick Cavett show, and the fact that Dick Cavett, he was a Jack Parr fan, he showed up at the studio one day, and he came across Jack, and he says, "Hey, I'd like to write for you," and because of that, we had the Dick Cavett show. So again, another guy gets the career launch from working behind the scenes on The Tonight Show.
Well, just more so in the Tonight Show than any other of these kind of
shows, yeah,
variety / guest TV shows. But I think the thing that Johnny Carson had that really kind of came through the screen and reached out to the audience was that everybody that was on the show, they were having a blast.
Oh, sure.
You know what I mean? And it just seemed like all of these, celebrities, that could be so full of themselves and be so pompous, that were, pulling down the filter and just letting go and having fun.
Yeah, I mean,
on the show, and that endeared the people that were guests to the audience, because now the guests got to see these actors and actresses actually being themselves, and it was Johnny Carson's demeanor and how he made them feel relaxed enough to pull the guard down and just kind of like start just being yourself and laughing and having fun and showing your own personal wit.
I mean,
rather than something that's repeating some lines that's on a script, you're actually seeing them be themselves.
And these people were really kind of humbled in the fact that it wasn't as easy back then during the Johnny Carson era to get on the Tonight Show. I mean, you had to have some kind of talent, or at least Johnny Carson wanted, had to want to kind of expose what he thought was a huge talent. I mean, I remember seeing people back in the day, like they'd go and appear in comedy, do their stand-up comedy in a club, and see Jay Leno tonight, who recently appeared on the Tonight Show, and that would be a big thing. I mean, you couldn't just get on the Tonight Show. People were having like their agents and managers lobby just to get them an appearance on the Tonight Show, and that was a thing. I mean, if you got into the Tonight Show, I mean, people were all of a sudden looking at you and going to know who you were.
Yep. But that was the same thing. That was the same recipe for the Ed Sullivan Show too.
Oh yeah,
everybody was lobbying to be on the Ed Sullivan Show. There's a lot of correlations between
the two shows,
the Ed Sullivan Show and the Tonight Show. There's a lot of similarities. In how people. It was like a major score to be on the Ed Sullivan Show. It was the same thing. It was a major score to be on the Tonight Show.
I mean, you got on either of those shows. It definitely was not amateur night, and
and for some people, it made their career. in doing the research, I read about this guy that was like this psychic, and Johnny Carson, actually kind of blindsided the guy, having him a guest on the Tonight Show, telling him that they were going to, interview him and ask questions, and he actually put the guy on the show to debunk his psychic ability and proved that the guy was a fraud.
Oh, wow.
And so then the guy, he just the guy failed at everything that Johnny Carson made him do, and the guy went home thinking that the end of his career, Johnny Carson just exposed him for being a fraud.
Yeah.
And then it turns out that the audience actually
loved it.
Was endeared to him, and he became even more famous from that Johnny Carson episode than he was before he was on that show.
Yeah.
So even though you take a show that was supposed to ruin somebody,
yeah.
To do whatever he was doing, it actually turned out to have the opposite effect, and that guy became even more successful as a psychic after that whole thing, even though during the whole, he was totally exposed that he was a fraud.
Now, Gar, to kind of wrap up the Johnny Carson era of The Tonight Show, on May 22nd, 1992, Johnny Carson retired as host of The Tonight Show after 3 decades of hosting the show. Just think about that, 3 decades, and was replaced by Jay Leno, of course.
Yes. During the 1999-2000, I got hired to do this TV show called Your Big Break.
Yeah, you mentioned that before, yeah.
And it was at NBC Studios over there in Burbank, and it was there's where they had the stage for the show that I was doing it. It was this big giant airplane hangar that they built 3 stages inside that airplane hangar, and then upstairs they built the offices and the green rooms and all dressing rooms and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And the very first stage was the Leno show.
Wow.
That was there. And then there was the second stage was the show that I was doing called Your Big Break, and then the third stage was for something else, and I don't remember what that was for. But I spent a week there, before the actual filming, in preparing for the filming and all that stuff. And during that week, there was a lot of time that you would be sitting around, that it's where I came up with the saying, this is the hurry up and wait business. Hurry. Wait.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Okay, hurry. Okay, now wait. Because that's really the business, It's
the
like,
TV show.
hurry.
Yeah.
And then now you got to sit there and wait. And you got all this downtime where you're sitting there waiting.
Between the taping,
so, during that downtime when I'm waiting, I used to go downstairs and hang out. And this is when I used to smoke. It's quite a while ago.
Yeah.
And I'd go out and have a cigarette, and I'd be standing by these, really bitchin' cars. I mean, really freaking cool cars.
Jay Leno,
and then I realized that they were Jay Leno's car. Every day that I was there and I would go out and have a cigarette, there was a different car parked there.
How cool was that?
And, because they wouldn't let anybody else do it, but Jay Leno could drive his car on the lot and park it right there, just outside the door of that stage, and then just get out of his car and walk in and walk right in.
I mean,
so I'm standing out there, and I'm standing next to all these, every day it's a bitchin' car, and it's like it's just kind of like there was so many experiences that I had from doing that. But that's one of those things, that ties into what we're doing today. I actually, got to
be there.
Stand there and see some of his cars up close and unsupervised.
How cool is that? I mean,
it was just the coolest thing ever.
I mean, I imagine, and to be Jay Leno at that time and feel like you've just been crowned the new king of a Tonight Show, I mean, stuff like you just described, he must have felt like he really had just arrived. And, once Leno took over, Gar, hosting the Tonight Show, a bit of a feud started between Leno and David Letterman, and the Tonight Show began to compete with Late Night with David Letterman to see which show would get high ratings. The feud was mostly on Letterman's part, who felt he should have gotten the Tonight Show over Leno. Letterman came across to me as a little more angry and bitter. Letterman was more vocal about his feelings and dislike of Jay Leno. And Leno came across as much more friendly, likable, and down to earth. That was just kind of my opinion,
Well, my 2 cents, Leno came off a little more California.
Yeah.
And Leno came off a little more New York.
Yeah.
Because that, what you just described is really kind of a personality difference between New York and California.
Maybe that's
which is why New Yorkers call Californians laid back. Hey, man. Hey, bro.
Yeah.
What's up, dude? Those are your classic New York, references to California.
Oh, sure.
But then New York is, it's just, it's a very condensed city, which kind of makes people aggro.
Oh, sure.
And it just kind of became part of New York personality.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying one's better than the other, but that you can't stop 2 places from being different from each other.
Yeah.
And these are these differences, just like people from the South are also very different and also have their classic, things, references when you're referencing to people in the South.
Yeah, and so,
it's not good or better, it's just pointing out the differences.
And on that point you just made, I mean, it kind of becomes team sports, Letterman fans against Leno fans, and who's gonna win or be crowned the winner. But here's another interesting thing that I didn't realize until doing the research for today's episode. Once Leno was named as Carson's replacement, both Johnny Carson and David Letterman remained close friends because they were both angry and bitter at NBC for not giving the Tonight Show to Letterman. Apparently, Johnny Carson voiced that he really wanted Letterman to have a show, and he thought he should have a role in picking his replacement, and he was very angry that they went with Jay Leno, not Letterman, and because of that, it was Carson who advised Letterman to cut his ties with NBC and take his show to another network. He wanted Letterman to take his show to another network, which ended up being CBS, and have a Tonight Show, compete against David Letterman's show and see who came out on top as far as in the ratings.
Yeah, my personal 2 cents is when that whole thing happened with Conan O'Brien.
Yeah.
Leno wound up kind of like pushing Conan O'Brien over to the side and said, I'm coming back. I was watching Conan O'Brien during that short stint, and to be honest with you, it was freaking hilarious.
Yeah,
they had some really funny stuff going on with Conan O'Brien's version, and NBC never really gave them, the chance to get their foothold, because you can't do a transition from one host to the other and not have, there be a transitional occur in the ratings too. It's virtually impossible, to have that be seamless.
Yeah, well,
honestly, I think Conan O'Brien really got the raw end of that stick, because I was watching it and he was freaking hilarious. He was really going for it too. He really wanted to establish his own personality to doing it.
I totally agree with you, Gar. I mean, I think what happened, even in the research I did, what it said was, really, like you said, Conan O'Brien. I mean, he was known for being a comedian before the Tonight Show, but the thing is, he really didn't get a fair shake. I mean, he only lasted for 1 year on the Tonight Show, and from what I understand, it's kind of like something you see so often in the history of TV. I mean, for whatever reason, I mean, it's a transition, like you said. You got to give it time for the audience to grow and accept, there's a new host. But he lasted for 1 year, and basically, like a lot of times, as you see with TV shows, okay, Conan O'Brien, he's been the host for a year. The ratings have gone down since he's been the host. He must be the reason for that. So I'll tell you what, we're going to call Jay Leno back, and we're going to have him come back, because at least when he was on the show got ratings. And then the funny thing about that is they bring Jay Leno back. And do you want to know why Jay Leno left after returning the second time? Because he made a joke. He made a joke about the fact that NBC had slipped in the TV ratings, and they did not like that. So all of a sudden, he was out, and Jimmy Fallon was in.
Well, and I would be very hard to convince that when they interjected Jimmy Fallon, there wasn't a transitional dip in the ratings also.
Yeah.
Because to be honest with you, I started watching when Jimmy Fallon took over, and it really wasn't very good.
Yeah,
Jimmy Fallon had not had a chance to establish his own voice in the show, and it was very obvious that he was going to have to go through this growth period and finding his
voice,
personality with the show, and eventually they wound up doing it because it's still on and it's still going strong. I don't personally watch it, because the appeal to that show is to a much younger audience, which the humor I don't really relate to like I've related to the previous humor. I'm not going to say that it's bad humor. It's just it's going over my head because I don't get it. I'm not really from that generation, and I'm sure there's a funny aspect of it that I'm just not getting.
No,
you know what I mean?
I'm with you, Gar.
The appeal appeals to a much younger audience, and so they wound up losing me, but they gained a whole new legion. And those legions are happy with him. So, goodwill to them. I just don't really, watch it much.
I'm with you, Gar. See, and I think what it's missing, like so many current TV shows that are on. I mean, there was a time, like going back to what we've been talking about the whole episode, the Johnny Carson and Jay Leno eras. What made the show so funny, besides the host, is they wanted everybody to tune in. They wanted to make everybody laugh. Now, since Jimmy Fallon has taken over, they only care about what half of the target audience out there thinks. I mean, give you a perfect example. When he first took over, Donald Trump was president. He had Donald Trump come on the show, and people laughed. And they thought the president was funny, whatever he said. And then, a couple years down the line, he goes on Jimmy Fallon on all these talk shows, and he goes on an apology tour telling people, "Oh, I apologize for ever having Donald Trump on the Tonight Show. And as long as I'm hosting, I promise he will never be allowed back on the show." So, you're banning somebody from coming on your show just because you don't agree with them politically. You tell Stephen Colbert is another great example. You will, his target audience, I guess, is a Democratic audience. He only wants to appeal to those people. Same thing with Jimmy Fallon. He had Joe Biden on recently, and Joe Biden, who's known for kind of these gaffes and not knowing what he's saying, he kind of got lost in what he's saying, and because he's on Joe Biden's team, so to speak, he was trying to help him pump up his numbers and stuff. And to me, it's more about not being on the same team with somebody politically, but being able to make everybody laugh. Tell a joke so everybody can laugh, not just half people out there, you know?
Well, everybody makes choices.
Yeah.
The people behind doing the Jimmy Fallon show has made their choice, and for some people, that can work out, beneficially. But for a lot of people, if you're alienating, half of your audience, it could be the death.
Yeah.
The show. Obviously, it hasn't turned out to be the death of the show.
Yeah.
But I subscribe more to Johnny Carson's viewpoint on it. I personally don't really, I keep my personal views on, those kind of things
out of the show.
Close to vest.
Yeah.
And and I do it for the same reasons that Johnny.
Yeah.
Was keeping those viewpoints close to vest. Because but we all make
a choice.
These choices.
Yeah.
And and whatever comes from those choices, whether it be good or bad, we have to live with those choices.
In fact, Jimmy Fallon, I will say this: I think part of the reason he still has a job, like you're right to say that. If the ratings had gone way down with him, they would have probably had another host, or they would have pulled. They would have said, "Oh, okay, the Tonight Show is now gonna, because the ratings got so low, we're gonna pull it from the from there. No more." That hasn't happened, so there still is an audience. But I think part of the reason Jimmy Fallon still has a show too on the Tonight Show is because he's one of those guys. Probably he knows not to kind of mess with the network brass. He knows not to make a joke about NBC's ratings, dipping or something. I mean, Jay Leno dared to go there, and he got fired for that. I mean, it's kind of stupid when you think about it.
Sometimes people will dare to go there because they want to push to get them to fire you.
Yeah, and let's be honest, Jay Leno's in a great place in life where he could afford to get fired like that. It didn't really matter, and like in the last.
Well, I got to see some of his cars up close.
Yeah.
But I enjoy every once in a while I'm flipping the channels and I got nothing going on and I'm just like sitting there. I'm just killing some time watching some TV and I'll stop and I'll watch Jay Leno's Garage.
Sure, why not? Yeah, and and again, he's real authentic with that because that's a true passion he has. He's not just doing the show, to make $1 million. Not that he needs to, but you know what I mean. It's a true passion.
He owns a couple of electric, a couple of the first electric cars ever made.
Oh wow, how cool is that? And other thing, like just to bring up Johnny Carson one last time. Thing I loved about Johnny Carson, he was so authentic too. He you didn't know what his political views really were, and the thing is, he was all about getting everybody to laugh. He didn't, and he was another person didn't really care who he offended. I mean, he wanted to make you laugh, but you never get him like Jimmy Fallon apologizing for having somebody on the show. And that's what people, at least like me, kind of really tuning in because the guy was so real. He was who he was. He didn't apologize about it, and I think that's why I dare say I'm never going to see another person like Johnny Carson. He was once in a lifetime kind of one of those icons.
Yeah, well, alluding to what I was saying in the very beginning of this episode we're all fortunate enough to be on this earth
to see
at this time to experience these things and to be able to do a podcast like this and be able to talk about these things and really try to dust off old memories and bring accolades back to people that used to be iconic and hugely popular entertainers from past generations. It's really we're all lucky to be alive at this time and experiencing these things.
And that's why...
And be able to re-experience these things, going over old memories. Or sometimes, people that were not born during that time but have an affinity for learning about, things from the past that, from a time before their time. I was that kind of kid. When I was a kid, I used to enjoy history, and the thing about history was always trying to, in my mind, picture what it was like to live in ancient Aztec times, and how much different those times were for children back then than they were for me when I was a child.
Oh, sure.
You see what I'm saying? It's
when you're living through this stuff at the time, you don't realize the kind of historical reference it's going to have on your life one day, or just the fondness of you looking back. I mean, so much to the point that you and I live in Los Angeles, Orange County area, and there's a cable network out here, Spectrum. They have a cable channel, antenna TV. It's like where they play these old school TVs. And if you tune in around, I think it's 7 o'clock every night on antenna TV, you'll see old episodes of the Johnny Carson Tonight Show, just the Johnny Carson era. I guess maybe they have probably a ton of old footage from those episodes, and they play old episodes just from the Johnny Carson era. So that, again, that kind of speaks volumes. And as great as Johnny Carson was, as funny of a guy as he was, he also, like a lot of people that kind of get in that kind of place in their life, he had a huge ego, as you can imagine, and because of that, he had a few kind of big feuds with some of the celebrities of the day. Like I was reading, he got into a feud with Wayne Noonan over a real estate deal, and started telling jokes about Wayne Noonan. He didn't like it, and he kind of got in Johnny's face one day, showed up in NBC studios, and you quit telling jokes about me and this and that. And so Johnny Carson was a real loyal guy. Like if you were good to him, but loyalty was important. Like when Joan Rivers got her own show, he saw that as the ultimate betrayal. How dare she get a show of her own without telling him?
Well, she also went in competition because they aired that show during the same time slot.
Yeah. And she, from what I read, he never spoke to her again. And then another thing, not having to do with Johnny Carson, but Jay Leno. When Jay Leno ended his first run on The Tonight Show, NBC gave him another show at the time that would immediately follow The Tonight Show. But as part of the contract, because The Tonight Show thinks that iconic desk is so iconic to The Tonight Show, Jay was not allowed to have a desk on the stage. He had to do something else.
Trippy.
Yeah, trippy. And I think that is the word we're going to end this episode on, Gar. And so this episode we just did is going to post next Saturday on the 17th of September. And we will do the final and third installment of this episode, which is going to be on many of the guests that got their start on The Tonight Show. I've already come up with a great list. I can't wait to see who's on your list, Gar. So that's going to be a ton of fun, because that is the whole point of having a show like The Tonight Show. I mean, we talked about the different hosts, and that's important, and kind of the different eras, and now in part 3 we got to talk about the talent, because that was a big reason you have a show like this.
Yes, and I'm really looking forward to that. I'm going to be dusting off some real old ones, but during their time period, they were huge.
Yeah, and even though, like, somebody like Groucho Marx, to find out, like you said, that was the guy that introduced Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show for the very first time. I mean, I can imagine being Johnny Carson, and even though a lot of people listening to this, who the hell is Groucho Marx? You go online or you look up the Marx Brothers, and just Groucho Marx. So back in his day, he was just hilarious. He was just a hysterical actor from back in the day. Him and those other Marx Brothers. But I mean,
well, by the time he introduced him, Groucho was an icon.
Exactly.
He was royalty.
Exactly. And so many of these people we're talking about are long gone, but they would go on to have legendary careers, and that's kind of like the passing of the baton from a guy like Groucho Marx to Johnny Carson. And I guess the final thing in posting stuff yesterday on the Jack Parr era of the Tonight Show, I was very interested to find out. I was unable to find a ton of stuff like video wise to post. What I was able to find, it was kind of grainy, but that's how it was back in the day. And I did come across some audio of him talking about walking off the show, and because he felt like he was really kind of censored, and he didn't like that. And then if you watch an episode with Jack Parr on the Dick Cavett show, he kind of gets into that. And what's kind of interesting is, like you said, Jack Parr was a rock star back in the day, but after he walked off the Tonight Show, and he came back a month later and remained on the Tonight Show for another 2 years. But after he finally left the Tonight Show, he was thought of as a jerk, a loudmouth, somebody who's difficult to work with, and he kind of just, from time to time he'd appear on Johnny Carson's Tonight Show. There's some video clips I found of that, but he kind of disappeared, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, well, he had his
reign.
15 minutes of fame.
And he got it. Yeah. Well, Gar Borras, you are the rock star of everybody's favorite pop culture playground, and we will leave it at that. And I will see you again in 2 weeks, my friend.
Totally looking forward to it, brother.
Okay, bye-bye.
Chaotic Riffs Magazine.